Hello, friends. Welcome to Oma's Story Nook Jr., where letters tell stories and every tale is full of wonder.
Long ago, before the buzzing of cars and the flashing of screens, there was a valley where the wind carried whispers. Whispers of courage, whispers of fear, whispers of battles waiting to be fought. On one hill, soldiers polished their shields until they glimmered like mirrors in the sun. On the opposite hill, another army stamped their feet, their armor clattering like 1,000 pots falling in a kitchen. Between them stretched a valley, quiet, wide, and waiting. But the valley was not as quiet as it seemed. Each morning a rumble rolled down from one side like thunder tumbling off the mountains. It was not thunder, it was not drums. It was a voice so loud it made the birds scatter from the trees, a voice so heavy it made knees knock together. This voice belonged to a man, or perhaps something bigger than a man. His name was Goliath. Taller than doors, broader than oxen, his shadow alone seemed enough to frighten an entire village. His spear was as thick as a small tree. His armor clanged like a storm of iron every time he moved. When he laughed, it was deep and sharp, like rocks cracking apart. Every morning and every evening, he stepped into the valley, lifted his booming voice, and called for a challenger. And every morning and every evening, the army across the valley trembled. Not one man dared step forward, but this is not only a story about a giant. No. A giant alone makes a story of fear. This, children, is a story about something greater than a giant. It is about a boy who was not taller than the trees, who wore no armor, who carried no sword. He was a shepherd, more used to talking to sheep than soldiers. He had nimble feet, a curious heart, and eyes that sparkled like the morning sun on fresh water. His name? David. While armies shook in their boots, David played songs to his sheep. While helmets rattled in fear, David learned the patience of watching stars and the skill of swinging a sling. He was the youngest in his family, the one sent on errands, the one overlooked when warriors were counted. Yet in this boy's chest beat a drum of courage. Not a loud drum, not a heavy drum, but a steady one, ba-bum, 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 that would one day echo louder than the shout of any giant. And so our tale begins in that valley of whispers. 2 hills, 2 armies, 1 booming giant, and far away a boy carrying bread, cheese, and a story that the world would never forget. The sun rose like a golden trumpet that morning, spilling light across the rolling hills of Judah. Birds hopped along fence posts, chirping without a care for the rumbling tensions not too far away. In a small village, the smell of baking bread drifted through the air, weaving its way past fields and hillsides until it found its way to a modest home, the house of Jesse. Inside, Jesse was busy packing a bundle. Round loaves of warm bread, a wedge of cheese, and a pouch of grain. His older sons had gone to war, joining King Saul's army, and Jesse's heart ached for them every day. So he turned to his youngest, David, the boy with quick feet and eager eyes. "Take this to your brothers," Jesse said, tying the bundle firmly. "Check on them. Bring me back news." David nodded, though his mind was already racing faster than his father's words. Bread and cheese, simple enough. But to deliver them to the battlefield, to see soldiers, horses, and shining swords. Oh, his heart leapt at the thought. The sheep bleated outside as if to remind him of his usual duty. But today, his father's errand gave him a rare chance to step beyond pastures and songs. With a shepherd's pouch slung across his shoulder, David set off down the road. His sandals kicked up little puffs of dust, the loaves bounced lightly against his side, and, though no one had invited them, 2 of his sheep trotted after him, tails wagging like friendly dogs. "Shoo," David whispered, but they only blinked and followed. He sighed. "Fine then. But if you embarrass me in front of soldiers, I'll never forgive you." The journey was long, but David filled it with song. His voice lifted into the morning air, cheerful and clear, weaving verses about green fields, faithful God, and stars that told stories when the world was quiet. His sling hung at his side, a familiar friend, and from time to time he bent to pluck smooth pebbles from the ground, tossing them high before catching them again. Hours later, as the sun climbed higher, David heard a new sound. Metal clashing, boots stomping, voices shouting orders. His heart fluttered with a mix of nerves and excitement. He crested a hill, and there below him sprawled a sight that stole his breath. On one slope, the army of Israel spread in a wave of tents and banners. Spears glittered like forests of silver. Shields rested in the dirt, catching the sun. Horses stomped and snorted. The camp buzzed with motion, yet David noticed something strange. It was not a motion of confidence, but of unease. Soldiers glanced nervously toward the valley. Some adjusted helmets again and again, as though armor could hide trembling. David hurried down the hill, weaving through the crowd. The bread and cheese pressed warm against his side. The sheep bleated loudly, earning more than a few puzzled stares. "There's the boy," called one of his brothers, Eliab, striding toward him. Eliab's armor gleamed, but his face was tight, weary. "David, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be minding the sheep?" "I brought food," David said, offering the bundle with a grin, "and father wants news. Besides, the sheep are quite good at minding themselves." One of the sheep bleated as if to prove the point. Soldiers laughed nervously. Eliab rolled his eyes. David barely had time to set down the bread before a new sound froze the air. It began as a tremor, like stones tumbling down a cliff. Then it became a roar, a voice so massive it seemed to push against the very air, rattling shields and shivering tents. "Choose a man to fight me." Every head turned toward the valley. David's heart jumped into his throat. There, striding into the open, was the largest man he had ever seen, or would ever see. Goliath. The giant moved like a walking mountain, each step a thunderclap. Sunlight flashed against bronze armor that covered him like a second skin. His spear was taller than David himself, thick as a tree branch, its iron head glinting like a shard of lightning. Across his shoulders rested a shield so wide it could have roofed a hut. "Send your best," the giant thundered, his voice echoing against the hills. "If he wins, we will be your servants, but if I win—" He lifted his massive spear until it pointed toward Saul's army like a dark finger. "Then you shall be ours." The Israelites shuddered. Some looked away, others pulled back into tents. No one moved forward. David's eyes widened. His heart beat fast, but not with fear, at least not only fear. It was amazement, curiosity, and something else too. Something like indignation. How could a man so loud, so proud, mock the armies of the living God? The giant laughed, a booming, rolling laugh that seemed to scrape the sky. When at last he turned and lumbered back toward his camp, a silence fell heavier than any helmet. David looked around. Soldiers murmured. None stepped forward. None seemed willing. He swallowed, his young face thoughtful, his fingers tightening around the strap of his sling. The sheep bleated again. This time, David did not hush them. He stood still, watching the place where the giant had vanished, and deep inside, that steady drum in his chest began again. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. The camp buzzed after Goliath's challenge, but not with courage. It buzzed like a hive that had been rattled, fearful, restless, scattered. Soldiers leaned on spears as if they might collapse without them. Others muttered under their breath, shaking heads, voices low. David wove among them, wide-eyed. He could not help it. Questions tumbled out of him like stones skipping across water. "Why isn't anyone stepping forward?" he asked one man, adjusting his shield. The soldier gave him a grim look. "Step forward. Against that." He's been coming out every day for weeks, morning and evening, shouting, daring, mocking. No one can match him. But isn't this the army of the living God? David pressed, his small brow furrowing. Isn't there even one man who believes he can help? The soldier sighed as though the words were heavy to hear. Boy, belief is easy on a hilltop, harder in the valley of giants. David turned to another group. What would happen if someone did fight him and won? This soldier snorted. Win? Impossible. But the king, he's desperate. He's promised riches, even his daughter's hand in marriage. Whoever defeats Goliath will be honored in Israel. David blinked. Riches. A princess. He didn't care much for either. But the thought of Goliath roaring unchallenged stirred something fierce in him. Nearby, Eliab overheard and strode over, his face red with frustration. David, why are you even asking these things? You're just a boy. You came to gawk, didn't you? Left those few sheep in the wilderness just so you could watch a battle like a game. David turned, surprised by the sharpness of his brother's words. I came because Father sent me. I brought food, didn't I? And I only asked questions. Can't I even speak? Eliab huffed, but before he could say more, others had caught David's words. Whispers spread through the camp. The boy said someone should fight. He said God will help. Bring him to the king. And just like that, the murmurs carried David toward the largest tent in the camp. Inside, King Saul sat with furrowed brow, his crown tilted slightly as though it too bore the weight of worry. He was a tall man himself, broad-shouldered, once a warrior admired by all. Yet in this moment, even he looked smaller beneath the shadow of Goliath's threats. Into this tent David was brought. He bowed slightly, the bread bundle still tucked under his arm, his sling hanging loose. My lord, David said, voice steady though his heart beat quick, do not let anyone lose heart because of him. I will go and fight this Philistine. Saul blinked, then leaned forward, astonished. You are only a boy. He has been a warrior since his youth. You cannot stand against him. David straightened, his eyes shining. When I watched my father's sheep, lions and bears came. They took lambs from the flock. I chased them down. I struck them and rescued the sheep. When they turned on me, I seized them by the beard and struck them dead. The same Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine. The tent fell silent. Saul studied the boy's face. There was no boasting there, no foolish grin. Just steady conviction, like a candle that refused to go out, even in the wind. At last, Saul exhaled. Go then. May the Lord be with you. He gestured, and attendants hurried forward with armor. A bronze helmet, a heavy coat of mail, a sword longer than David's arm. Piece by piece, they strapped the armor onto him. The helmet slid down over his eyes, the coat weighed him like a millstone. The sword clanked against his leg. David tried to step. Clank. Another step. Clatter. He nearly toppled. The soldiers exchanged uneasy smiles. David stopped, shook his head, and began unbuckling the straps. I cannot wear this. I'm not used to it. The armor fell away with a clang, echoing through the tent. David stood small once again, but freer, lighter. He picked up his sling, the simple strip of leather that had been his companion for years. Then he stepped out of the tent, past wide-eyed soldiers who whispered to one another. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, stretching long shadows across the valley. David walked toward a brook at the valley's edge. The sound of water trickled through the air, soft and steady, like a secret song. He knelt, running his fingers through the cool stream, searching. One by one he chose smooth stones, round, firm, perfect for flying straight. He picked 5, slipping them into his pouch. His hand lingered there, feeling their weight, not heavy like Saul's armor, but just right. He stood, lifting his face to the valley. The Philistines bustled on their hilltop, The Israelites murmured behind him, and across the open ground, Goliath's massive shape was moving again, stepping forward for his evening roar. David tightened the strap of his sling. His sheep bleated faintly in the distance. The drum in his chest grew louder, steadier. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. And the boy began to walk toward the giant. The valley grew still as the sun dipped lower, painting the hillsides in molten gold. Dust hovered in the air, stirred only by the steady tramp of a single man. It was not a soldier, it was not a warrior. It was David, small against the wide horizon, yet walking as though the earth itself made way for him. On the Philistine hill, armor rattled, shields tilted. Soldiers elbowed one another and pointed. "Look, they've sent a boy," they laughed, "a child with a shepherd's sling." Their voices rang out like crows mocking from a treetop. On the Israelite hill, the laughter was met with silence. Soldiers held their breath. Mothers and fathers in their tents shut their eyes. Even the wind seemed to hush, waiting to see if this was courage or folly. Then came the other sound, a sound that rolled like thunder down the slope. Goliath. He stepped forward, each stride shaking the ground. His armor clanged like falling gates. His shield-bearer trotted nervously ahead, the massive shield wobbling in his grip. When at last Goliath reached the open space, he stopped, towering tall, his shadow stretching across the valley like a dark river. And he laughed. It was not the laugh of joy, it was the laugh of mockery, cruel and sharp. "Am I a dog," he thundered, "that you come at me with sticks?" He gestured at David's sling as though it were nothing more than a twig. His booming voice echoed against the rocks. "Come here, boy. I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." The Philistines roared with laughter. The Israelites trembled. But David kept walking. His sandals pressed into the dirt. His hand brushed the pouch at his side, feeling the stones within. Smooth, waiting, chosen. The drum in his chest beat louder now, but it was not the drum of fear. It was the drum of trust. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. He lifted his eyes to the giant, and though his voice was small compared to Goliath's roar, it carried across the valley with surprising clarity. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will hand you over to me, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." The words hung in the air, fierce and steady. The Philistines snared. The Israelites leaned forward, hope flickering in their eyes. Goliath's grin twisted into a scowl. And then, without another word, David stopped walking. He bent slightly, reaching into his pouch. Fingers brushed stone. He pulled one free, the smooth pebble cool in his palm. He placed it into the sling. The leather straps nestled perfectly into his hand, as though this moment had been waiting for him all along. The giant stomped forward, raising his spear. His roar shook the hills. But David did not waver. He began to swing the sling. Whir, whir, whir. The sound sliced through the silence, building faster, sharper, tighter. His arms spun with practiced rhythm, the stone blurring in its cradle. Dust lifted around his feet as if the earth itself were holding its breath. The sling whipped faster, whir, 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 until, with a swift release, David let the stone fly. Time seemed to slow. The stone sailed through the air, a tiny flash against the sky, past the roar of soldiers, past the gleam of armor, past the point of the giant's spear. It struck true. Crack! The sound was sharp, unmistakable. The stone sank into Goliath's forehead. His eyes widened, stunned, as if he could not believe that something so small, so simple, had found him. Then the mountain wavered. Goliath's body swayed once, twice. His knees buckled. His great frame crashed forward, slamming into the earth with a thunderous roar that shook dust into the air. The ground trembled. Birds scattered. silence fell. The Philistines froze, mouths open. The Israelites stood rooted in place, hearts pounding, and in the middle of the valley, a boy with a sling stood over a fallen giant. For a long moment, the valley was silent, silent in a way that even the birds seemed to honor. A giant had fallen, and dust still hung in the air like a curtain drawn across the stage of battle. David stood very still, his sling dangling loosely from his hand. The stone had flown, the giant had fallen, and yet the boy's chest still thudded with the echo of his heartbeat. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. On the Philistine hill, soldiers gaped, mouths open, armor clattering as if their trembling bodies could not hold it still. Some blinked as though they had just awoken from a dream. Others stumbled backward, their boasts swallowed whole by fear. The man they had trusted, their towering champion, lay face down in the dirt. On the Israelite hill, the silence broke in a single gasp. Then another, until the air was filled with a rising wave of shouts. "The boy! The boy struck him down!" Voices tumbled one over another, shields banged against the ground, spears lifted high, and then, all at once, an eruption. "For Israel! For the Lord!" The army surged forward like a dam breaking. Their fear had vanished, swept away in a rush of courage. They poured down the slope, their voices echoing, their sandals pounding the earth, chasing the Philistines who now fled in panic, their formation shattered, their hearts undone. But David did not chase. He stepped slowly toward the fallen figure before him. The shadow of Goliath seemed smaller now, no longer stretched tall across the valley. Dust settled on bronze armor. The once booming voice was silent. The earth, which had shaken with his every step, was calm. David paused beside the giant. The boy who had come with bread and cheese now stood in the place where warriors had feared to go. He lifted his eyes toward the hills, toward the trembling lines of men who watched, and in that gaze, something changed. He was no longer simply the youngest son of Jesse. He was the boy who had defied the giant. The sheep bleated faintly in the distance, as if even they had been holding their breath. The sound was small, but it made David smile. By the time David returned to the camp, carrying with him the proof of victory, the army swarmed around him. Men who had once towered above him now bent low to clasp his shoulders. Some laughed with relief, others wept openly. The weight of shame had lifted. The yoke of fear was broken. King Saul himself came forth, his crown glinting in the sunlight, his face a mixture of astonishment and awe. He looked at the boy, no armor, no sword, dust on his sandals, sling still in hand, and shook his head slowly, as though words could not find him. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul finally asked. David answered simply, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." The name would not be forgotten. That night, as campfires flickered and songs rose across the hillside, the story of the day spread like fire through dry grass. Children repeated it in whispers, wide-eyed, imagining the sling's whir. Women lifted their voices in songs of triumph. Soldiers pounded rhythms on their shields, chanting the boy's name. Even the stars above seemed to twinkle brighter, as if joining in the celebration. But David did not boast. He sat quietly at the edge of the firelight, his sling folded neatly in his lap. He gazed into the flames, hearing again the giant's roar, the swoosh of the sling, the thud of victory. His heart swelled with gratitude, not for his own strength, but for the strength of the one who had never left his side. The valley that had once been filled with mockery now rang with joy. The place that had echoed with the voice of a giant now echoed with the laughter of a boy and the songs of a nation. And so, the story of Goliath was over, but the story of David has just begun.
Thanks for watching, friends. We had fun today. Subscribe, like, and comment.